heat is the next big transformation in the energy system. And so to get to that net zero, what we'll need is a step up in all types of technologies, whether that's building level solutions or network solutions. But we see network solutions, and specifically heat networks, playing a continued ongoing important role in getting us there. So what we're talking about is the growth of the market from around 3%, around 14 terawatt hours of heat delivered through heat networks, to around 18%, or about 90 to 95 terawatt hours of heat delivered via networks. And that's to keep us on the most cost effective pathway to decarbonising our homes and buildings. So why do we like heat networks? I mean, clearly, you know, we think that they're a really interesting piece of infrastructure, but actually one of the main reasons is because they unlock some of these largest scale, lowest carbon sources of heat that you just wouldn't be able to do at a building scale. So whether that's heat from energy from waste plants or waste heat from industry, geothermal, mine water, interesting projects taking waste heat from tubes and other means. It's a really fantastic way to harness those sources of heat. The second reason is actually they work really well in this kind of rapidly transforming energy system that we see. So one where everything needs to be smarter to be able to shift your demand, to be able to store, to be able to choose when you're running plant, so that we can take advantage of the 40 gigawatts of new wind capacity that's due to come online between now and 2035. So a proven technology from that perspective. The third reason is actually we still have a couple of credible pathways to decarbonise heat and buildings here in the UK. The obvious one is electrification, and thinking about what the rollout of heat pumps looks like over the coming decade, and of course still trying to understand the role that hydrogen and other low carbon gases could play in decarbonising our homes. And whilst we used to talk about these three pathways, heat networks being the third, actually I think the more powerful thing is that heat networks underpin either of those pathways and can shift between electrification or hydrogen should that be proven economic. So we see a rapidly growing market here in the UK, and actually industry have been thinking about what it would take to deliver the kind of penetration that we're talking about within the heat and building strategy. And broadly speaking, we think we need somewhere between 60 and 80 billion pounds of capital out to 2050 in order to deliver this investment. And as this slide shows, that there's two critical things on this slide that I haven't spoken about. The first is the impact on locales, which is a clear theme for today. And as we can see, both in terms of heat networks being delivered today and the pipeline of heat network projects across the UK, they really are north to south, east to west. Yes, largely driven around higher density conurbations, but clearly they have a huge impact in levelling up those parts of the economy that have fallen behind. And I think the other thing to reflect on looking at this slide is, I've just talked about 60 to 80 billion. So even in the, I guess 6 months since these slides were initially drafted, we see the investment opportunity and the growth opportunity here in the UK to be even greater in delivering this infrastructure that's fit for the future. Next slide, please, Sam. So what are we doing about it? Well, about 12 months ago, we launched our Heat Networks Transformation Programme. And anyone who has read through the Energy White Paper will kind of see how this all kind of hangs together, but I'll sort of give us a little whistle-stop tour. Regardless of whether the right number for heat networks growth is 15, 18, 20, 25%, clearly it's a lot higher than 3. And so there's going to need to be a range of things happening in the marketplace to try and help generate that growth. So just sort of stepping down and through this, we continue to put funding into the Heat Networks Delivery Unit, and ostensibly that enables projects to go through those early stage sort of project development stages, ones where traditionally you might find abortive project costs, and looks to share the risk of that with project sponsors, traditionally through local authorities, but actually increasingly looking at how we can work with a range of project developers to enable those projects to come to market. And that's really driven the pipeline of projects into our main capital funds that are shown here. So under this contract, the Heat Networks Investment Project, which is our long-standing flagship capital support programme, our 320 million of capital to provide grants and loans into projects to broadly turn them from economically viable into commercially investable. And we're reaching our kind of close of that project with our last funding round in January. One of the elements around the Heat Networks Investment Project was a desire to create this self-sustaining market, one which we'll need if we need to bring in 60 to 80 billion of capital into the sector. That's not going to exist just on the balance sheets of local authorities or even on the balance sheets of some very large corporate companies that are currently active in the market. So how do we continue to use our funding to unlock large-scale investment? And an element of that was us thinking about the inroads that we'd made through the Heat Networks Investment Project and realising that actually the market needed some further support. And so we've now got our Green Heat Network project, our Green Heat Network Fund, which is our next stage of support from 2022 through to 2025. Looks a lot like HNIP, with a critical difference. We're looking to accelerate the transition from higher carbon heat sources into unlocking some of those large scale low carbon sources of heat that I mentioned previously. We've got some other schemes underway. I might ignore the sort of transition and demonstrator schemes and just talk about the big stuff. So we've got our heat network efficiency scheme, currently in demonstrator phase, but with the intention to launch a main scheme towards the back end of next year. Essentially what that's looking to do is put some more money into existing networks, ones that might be suboptimal, might not be performing so well, but where we can actually see some real benefit and in improving the customer experience in advance of regulation coming in. And then the other big ticket items are around regulation. So the two main strands of regulation being enhanced consumer protections, enshrining decarbonisation as a critical part of heat networks, and the last pillar being increasing the investability by giving similar rights and powers to heat networks as other types of utility infrastructure. So trying to reduce the risk and drive the speed of development. And the second main piece is around heat network zoning. So in essence, where a heat network is going to be most cost effective and how can we create the conditions for those networks to grow at pace and at scale. And so heat network zoning tries to answer that by being clear where those networks are going to be, working between central and local government to establish and enforce against those networks, and mandating a number of buildings to connect to heat networks in order to reduce risk and drive investment. So giving confidence and clarity to local, central government, market and customers in hopefully a win for everyone. And that consultation just closed on Friday, so we're eagerly waiting for the responses to that. So that's the kind of scene setting, but I wanted just to spend a couple of minutes attempting to link this to the theme of the day around place-based investing. And so, for us, heat networks are really a uniquely kind of local solution. There's not many other solutions where you're digging up local roads, connecting customers and buildings, and so it's not like building a wind farm somewhere and it connects to a national grid. So actually, there's a huge opportunity for thinking about how you can bring the benefit to locales. So you're connecting local people and businesses to local low carbon infrastructure. I think there's an opportunity to maximise the benefit felt by the investment, whether that's cost effective energy, whether that's local skills local jobs, skills, supply chain work, or actually delivering other related infrastructure that all fits together in trying to address some of those inequalities that we see. So I think that's a compelling proposition for a sort of buyer or sponsor. I think for investors, it's not just about place-based investment, but actually place-shaping investment. Investing in this infrastructure that's going to be fit for the future and taking advantage of data and digitalization, and investing in infrastructure that actually acts as a platform for other local investments. So whether that's in the same market, things like demand-side response or trading, or whether actually you're using that as a platform for other types of investment through energy efficiency, storage, and the like. I think actually there's a summary in terms of the place-based impact investing reports, which I don't want to tread on later toes, and Harry and Lauren. So I just wanted to kind of summarise it here, because I was just sort of looking through and thinking how well heat networks fit sort of this description. So they talk about investment that can yield financial returns. Well, tick. Generates social and environmental impact. Well, tick, tick. And enhancing local economic resilience and sustainable development. Well, heat networks, I think, are right at the centre of being able to deliver all of those aspects, and so I think are well placed for place-based investment. And it's a huge opportunity. We're talking trillions. Okay, we're talking billions for heat networks. So clearly a role for private sector capital to come and work alongside the public sector to deliver this kind of local impact. And for us, that really is at the centre of why we think that BEIS is so needed, and why we think it's going to be such a success, bringing together those two parties to have a real impact in the marketplace. And that was me. That's me done. Hope I haven't stolen too much from other people's presentations.
Thank you so much, John. That was a really, really great opening. Just a reminder to everybody on the call this morning, if you do have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to drop them into the chat, or raise your hand, and we'll take them at the end of each of the presentations. Andrew, I think I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, everybody. Can you hear me okay, Sam?
Yeah, perfect.
That's good. Thanks, John. Now, some of you may have known that Caroline Bragg from ADE was due to be coming in between John and me. Unfortunately, she's unwell, and so she isn't here. So you're going to get my interpretation of what she might have said about policy, and in particular, I wanted to build on what John started to tell us about zoning and why this can have such a big impact on the potential for investment in heat networks and the benefits it can bring on a local basis. This first slide is just the introduction that echoes essentially what John has just said. We see a lot of potential for growth. So I'm not going to repeat that. We can move on, Sam. So what I thought would be really helpful, just in case some of you out there have not followed all that closely what the zoning proposals are about, and in a sense, how radical they might be, but also how transformative they could be. I wanted to run through some of this, and I put my little warning at the top right. This is not policy. This is my interpretation of my understanding of how this might work. And as John said, there's been a consultation. The consultation's just closed. How this ends up remains to be seen. But just to give, this is intended to give you a flavour. So what this really grapples with is deciding what's the best thing to do to deliver low carbon heat. And if you imagine this blue area on the diagram, which might be a local authority, and within it there's a zone which I've coloured in orange, which is the area with the higher heat density. Now, when you do your analysis, you find that not surprisingly, the areas with the higher heat density are more attractive for heat networks. And that might well be the best solution for those areas. All the buildings in those areas, or most of the buildings in those areas, would be good if they had heat networks. This principle only really works if everywhere else is also decarbonising. That's another part of the policy landscape, which is that ultimately, probably the rest of those buildings will, in the blue zone, will be having heat pumps. So they'll also need to invest in their carbon reduction. Go to the next one, please, Sam. Now, John mentioned too about sources. A heat network doesn't work without a source of heat, funnily enough. And so in this case, it might be shown in yellow, perhaps an energy from waste plant. And then you build a network that connects all the appropriate buildings in that zone through to the source of heat. And the size of the zone is impacted on by the scale of that source of heat and other opportunities there might be. A really important part of this is the potential powers that are granted to make that success more likely. And on the right of this slides is some examples of some of the work that's being done as part of the pilots that John mentioned. The diagram at the top is from Bristol. I think they're both from Bristol, showing at the more nitty-gritty level how this might play out. So there's detailed modelling that's carried out in order to work out where the appropriate places are for these zones to be built. We go on to the next one. Just some basic sort of economics of this. What's driving this? Why do zoning at all? Well, imagine this is an area of a town, and you've got a road and you've got a whole load of buildings. If you go on to the next slide, what tends to happen a lot at the moment is if you put in a heat network down this street and you connected the buildings in the sort of light orangey colour, you might have a viable network if they're big enough, but it's not a particularly attractive scenario. So the point of zoning, if we go to the next slide, is the zoning powers might oblige almost everybody to connect to the network. So we get the scenario shown in this diagram where almost every building is connected, as long as certain conditions are met. So I've drawn one, for example, that's a bit too far away, the one that's towards the top of the diagram, a bit too far away from the network, too expensive to connect. And there might be other buildings like the one at the bottom left that's too small, its heat demand is too low. There's no point in connecting that one either. Now, it doesn't take an economic genius to recognize that if you're getting all those customers for a similar level of investment, obviously you've got to pay for the connection to every building. That's going to cost quite a lot, but the really big investment, as we know, is the major infrastructure. So obviously this is going to be more attractive, and this is why zoning could be transformative to the economics of heat networks and make them require much less in the way of subsidy than they would apply in other circumstances. And what this does for us, as we've been saying, is it could transform the way in which these markets work for heat networks. The idea that you've got certainty of demand, which can really, as I say, make an enormous difference. Now, we should say immediately, as all of you know, that with great power for heating comes great responsibility for heating, and there will necessarily be obligations on people in providing these heat networks to treat people fairly and to have for the whole thing to fit together properly. But what may emerge from the consultation is that customers may be obliged to connect to the network. Sources of heat may be obliged to supply heat to the network, so people with an EFW will have to supply heat in. And interestingly, also, the network may be obliged to supply heat to customers if this is how it ends up, meaning that they can't cherry pick the best customers. It needs to work for everybody. It needs to work for the whole community. This whole package of things, though, makes schemes much more investable, enable more to happen. And just in summary on the right, coming out of, well, not an interpretation of the consultation, zones will be defined, sources of heat will be found, you choose somebody to build them out, and then you build out the network. That makes it sound easy. We know it won't be that easy, but let's move on, Sam. Okay, there's lots to resolve. As I said, the consultation closed last week. It was posing these questions: who precisely is doing what powers are needed, which buildings are included, how do they opt out if it's not appropriate, and protection and regulation, and who pays for what. So this is not a done deal, lots to engage with, but also to be ready for, because this could make a huge difference. If I can move on, Sam. So moving on, as John mentioned, one of the aims of HNIP was to create the self-sustaining market. As you know, HNIP has been is a major project investing in bringing through heat networks, and bringing in larger, strategic, optimized, all the good words, the heat networks. Really important part of this is helping to make sure those are good heat networks and to support customers. But the third one, I think, is the most relevant in the context we're talking about, building the capability of sponsors and the supply chain to be ready to develop more heat networks. If we can move on, Sam. So to remind you, it's going well. We've got schemes coming through with more than £600 million of capex. They all have potential to expand and decarbonize even more homes, and in fact to form the basis of some of these heat network zones that we've been talking about. Significant carbon savings. And the diagram on the right shows you a subset of the projects which have been funded. There are more which are in the pipeline, and watch out for the press releases, which will tell you more about those as and when they're able to be released. And touching on, here's moving on nicely, thank you. Here are some of the examples of the schemes which you may already know about if you're tracking. I hope you're all tracking what we're doing in HNIP. And as John mentioned, a variety of sources. We've got quite a few really interesting schemes using from energy from waste, really big schemes. Interestingly, the two schemes in about to say County Durham, one's in County Durham, one's in Gateshead in Tyneside. So using mine energy, for which there's a lot of interest, and other types of heat pumps. Different places, different solutions. We've still got some gas CHP schemes, which are a great way to build out heat networks, recognizing the need then to decarbonize those over time. We can move on, Sam. So as I mentioned just now, one of the key features of heat networks is they can grow and serve a wider range of communities. It's much easier to expand a heat network than to get one established. So it's a really important thing that HNIP's doing. And as I mentioned, it's logical then for these to form the seeds from which the much bigger networks within the heat network zoning could provide. But I really want to prompt people to think about the scale of what's needed. We've heard from CITB, the Construction Industry Training Board, about the need for growth in skills. We need more people who can do the work that's needed here. So we really need collectively to think about this. On the top right, the Heat Networks Industry Council, they've been estimating that we might need some figure around 35,000 new direct jobs in the sector, which is exciting, certainly for a whole range of investment opportunities. And we need to be thinking about how quickly we need that to get those people up to speed, and how many people can be transformed from existing sectors that may be in decline. And the bottom right point, again, a critical part of HNIP is driving community engagement, getting buy-in from communities. And it's been really interesting to see some of the cases where things are community driven rather than sort of centrally driven. And that again is part of the future that we hope to see. We can go on. So this is a pipeline of known projects, and actually in the context that we've been talking about, it's probably a little bit conservative, because there's so much potential that could happen. But just to give you a flavour that we're seeing well over £1 billion of things in the pipeline now. But if we jump onto the next slide, because I've repeated that image on the right by accident. So we may have a pipeline now of about £1 billion, but in the context of the numbers we've been talking about, John was mentioning, and some fairly simple calculations from what needs to be done and what HNIC have said, we're going to a situation where there could easily need to be £2 or £3 billion a year of investment in heat networks over the next couple of decades. We need to ramp up to that to get to that level of intervention. It's a real change from now. And as I put here, we tend to think just of the investment in the streets and in the networks, but remember, all of that process has got to be designed. The pipes have got to be built somewhere. hydraulic interface units, heat meters, controls, maintenance, all these things are needed. These are all areas where investment is needed to prepare for this and to get ready to build things out. And the simple diagram on the right is really posing these questions. All this stuff's got to be done. Where is it going to be done? Where will these jobs be? Who's going to be running these networks? Because at the moment we don't have the capacity to do it. And the final point here, it's all to play for. It could work out in a whole variety of different ways as we go forward. And I think my last slide, as John did, thinking about the link to the place-based. We've heard about the place-based briefly in terms of where those projects are that we're engaging with. But one really important dimension of this is engaging with local government. Obviously, all schemes are built somewhere, and you have to engage with the local government. Local government, though, has also been critical in most of the projects we've seen coming through HNIP. Most of them are either led by the local authority or developed in close partnership with them, and that's going to apply to zoning as well. However, the process lands in terms of how it's delivered. So engaging with local authorities is going to be critical to anybody who wants to get involved with delivering heat networks, the variety of reasons here are perhaps fairly obvious because of their local involvement and in a whole host of different ways, but just really wanted to flag up the importance of picking up and working with the local authorities in whichever way this turns out going forward. So that's the end of my piece. I hope that was reasonably coherent, and I'll pass on to Harry and Lauren.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Harry, you up first.
Yes, I am. Hi, guys. My name is Harry Pemberthy. I'm head of marketing for the Triple Point Group. And myself and my colleague Lauren have been given a quick 10 minutes to introduce you to place-based impact investing, PBII, the model, and look at how it can support the levelling up agenda. With the UK stark need for regional levelling up in focus, the Good Economy, Impact Investing Institute and Pensions for Purpose have produced a white paper showing how PBII can mobilize institutional capital to support the government's Build Back Better or levelling up agenda in the UK. As a purpose-driven investor, what we are, Triple Point, and a sponsor of the PBII Forum, we understand the need for private capital to support the levelling up agenda, and we really see the potential that the PBII framework from an investment point of view can help facilitate the process. So before we start looking at models, what is PBII basically? And it's PBII's impact investing, but it's focused and built around the needs of specific places and the challenges of those specific places in order to create social value. So, Sam, if you can move to the next slide. As it says in the name, and looking at this model, which was built by the Good Economy, as it says in the name, the key here is the specific place and starting with the place. It's understanding the challenges and needs of a community or locale, and then building the investment and policy pillars on the top of that. So in this model, we've identified a number of asset classes which create a more holistic end result in terms of upliftment, looking at housing, SME finance, clean energy, infrastructure, and regeneration. Now, all of these together will give that and create that holistic impact once and only once the challenges and the needs of that underlying place have been mapped and understood. It is then rolled out with, traditional impact investing rigor, and that is one targeting both the creation of societal value, but also looking at providing sustainable returns for investors as well. And I think obviously that's incredibly important. Sam, if we can go to the next slide. So just looking at those basic characteristics of PBII and how they differ from traditional impact investing. As with impact investing, there needs to be an impact intentionality. But with PBII, it's one that intentionality, rather than on a project by project basis, you're looking to that intentionality in response to the holistic needs of a community. And that's where that it really chimes well with the leveling up agenda. It's not only a question of creating impact per intervention, it's creating impact that will assist in that sort of leveling up of the community. As you can understand, it's important to have a very fixed definition of the place, and as well, because it's about leveling up that community, and there are multiple stakeholders engaged. Stakeholder engagement is very, very important in terms of these characteristics. As with traditional impact investing, impact measurement, management, and reporting is key, but once again, it needs to be done within the context of the place rather than just the individual project. The fifth characteristic, and one which is key, and I think this is an area where we're still fleshing out the mechanisms, but collaboration is key. If you can understand, from the investment pillars and the interaction with the representatives of the community and the place, the local authorities, collaboration is key to making this work. If you want to achieve that holistic place-based impact, the various stakeholders need to talk, collaborate, and engage to achieve those outcomes. And that's one area where everyone being part of the conversation is key at this point. So I'm going to hand over to Lauren, who's going to take you through how sort of district heating and the benefits of district heating perfectly align with the aims and objectives of PBII, and form part of the bigger push to meet the leveling up agenda from an investment point of view.
Thanks, Harry. Good morning, everyone. As Harry said, I'm Lauren Bright. Many of you will probably have seen my face a few times on this type of forum. I have been one of the HNIP business development managers for the last couple of years. And I've also been heavily involved in setting up BEIS alongside the team at BEIS and Richard, who's going to speak in a moment. In that role, as I say, many of you will know, I've spent many hours on the phone to the investment community, but also HNIP applicants, whether that be public or private sector projects, talking about district heating projects and the role it plays in communities. When we first started looking at PBII Triple Point, I thought it was quite obvious that there was some synergies between PBII and DH. And it just strikes us that heat networks could be a really key anchor investment for any PBII strategy. And so many of the things that we've heard spoken about this morning are going to help that. John and Andrew spoke about heat network zoning. We're seeing this policy bringing place into key perspective here. And we've also seen the power of district heating projects already in HNIP to support that local job creation. I'm going to do my little bit here to try and convince everyone that this is true and it's already working, and that going forward, district heating should be a key part of PBII investing. So in terms of job creation, we have already seen projects up in Leeds, supported by HNIP, but also supporting over 480 jobs in the area. That's including over 30 apprentices. Those are those measurable benefits that Harry was talking about before. We've also seen a similar thing in Liverpool. A project up there is setting up an apprenticeship scheme with a local community college to train up people to work on district heating schemes up there. One of the other points that's come up a few times here is that community engagement and stakeholder engagement. We have one scheme that amazes me, and it's the scheme at Swaffham Prior. Swaffham Prior, for those of you that don't know, is a gorgeous little village in Cambridgeshire. It's off gas grid. All of the cottages there, the majority of which are over 100 years old, they all have big oil requirements. It's ruining their gardens, and some amazing stakeholder engagement and community engagement there allowed the village and all of those individual cottages to become the anchor load for this community-led district heat network. It's starting construction now. They're going to have a heat pump for the village, and it's been all over the news. The village are really excited about it. So in terms of that community engagement, it's really clear that we can easily fit district heating into a clean energy pillar, into an infrastructure pillar. It's supporting those local communities. We're obviously mentioning all this at a BEIS event because we really hope that a combination of PBII, the levelling up agenda, and heat network zoning can open up some opportunities for private sector investment. And obviously we hope that BEIS can play a key role there. Just to finish off, if anyone on the call would like to speak to us about PBII, I think on the next slide there is the impactinvest.org UK website where you can learn more there, or more than happy for you to email us if you'd like to get involved. And on that, I think I'm handing over to Richard.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. I'm Richard Turner. I'm a Director at Amberside Advisors. We are part of the HNIP delivery partner group, but most relevant for these purposes, we helped to set up BEIS, which is an investment platform, a finance platform for heat networks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it just for a few minutes. We've introduced it a number of other sessions, but so what is BEIS? It's a PCR compliant procurement platform. It's actually called a dynamic purchasing system, which for those of you that haven't come across one, is a bit like a framework, a traditional framework, but differs in a number of important ways, not least of which is that suppliers, in this case funders, can join the platform at any time during its life and also leave. And it runs in a two-stage process. So suppliers are onboarded onto the platform, and then contracting authorities can use the platform to run competitions to appoint funders for their projects. And important that it's PCR compliant because it's been established to raise not just funding, but also to provide investment-related services, which would fall under the public procurement rules. It has a potential value of about £150 million, and it allows all public sector heat network owners and developers in England and Wales, doesn't cover Scotland, to procure either asset finance or equity investment and equity investment related services for their heat network projects. So there's two lots, the asset finance lot and then the equity investment lot, which also comes with potential services. It is separate from the heat network investment project, but it's designed to work alongside it and also designed to work alongside the Green Heat Network Fund, which starts next year. And it runs for till March 23, but BEIS have the option to extend it for 2 one-year periods, so up to a further 2 years. And BEIS is the administering authority. Triple Point manage it under the HNIP contract as agent, and Amberside then manage it day to day on behalf of the delivery partner group. So why did we establish it? Well, John and Andrew and others have talked about the market growth required to achieve the decarbonisation goals and the very significant private capital that's likely to require beyond the capabilities of most local authorities and requiring access to private capital. And we see that particularly as local authorities in particular come under funding stress with post-COVID, access to PWLB or wanting to use PWLB for other priorities. So looking for ways in which to involve private capital to allow them to fund their projects without having to access PWLB. It supports the delivery of the self-sustaining heat network market. That is crucial, that the market becomes self-sustaining over time. We've published a number of documents that go to that as well, a standardised due diligence set and a standardised set of documentation, sales, operations and maintenance set. And I'll give you some links for those in a minute. But BEIS is intended to be an efficient way for public sector bodies to access both private sector capital and skills through the PCR compliant platform, and for funders to access opportunities. Next slide, please, Sam. So it's available, as I mentioned, to all public sector bodies in England and Wales. So that's central government departments, non-governmental departmental bodies, devolved administrations, NHS bodies, universities, colleges, etc. Importantly, it's also available not just to fund new greenfield heat networks, but also to fund heat network extensions, opportunity to raise capital to fund those expansions, but also potentially to recycle capital for contracting authorities where they've got existing heat networks and either want to raise capital for other purposes or to recycle that capital into expanding their networks. So just a summary, really, the benefits that we see: accessibility, an efficient route for contracting authorities and funders, hopefully a more standardised route. Believe over time that BEIS will help reduce both timescales and costs of funder due diligence and approvals, to make a more efficient fundraising process. Flexibility, so ability for contracting authorities to access a range of skills alongside the funding, and that's something we see across public sector, that often there is a shortage of the kind of skills, development skills, and needed to get projects from where they are through to financial close and beyond. And finally, and obviously very importantly, value for money, giving contracting authorities the ability to access the most economically advantageous terms for their project. So that's a quick rundown of BEIS. Got some links on the next page. Sam, I assume, will circulate these afterwards. But you can find customer guidance and other guidance on BEIS at the link at the top. And there's links there to the standardised due diligence set and so on.
Perfect. Well, you've all got 10 minutes back of your morning. Thank you all so much for joining us.